I learned a lot of valuable lessons from this story I'm about to tell you. 1. Vaping isn't worth getting snatched off the street. And 2. Always pay attention to movies. When I turned 21, I realized I'd never done anything exciting or rebellious my whole life. Even after I got to college, I stayed in my dorm and studied instead of going to parties, even though I knew where I'd rather be. How sad is that? So on my birthday, me and my bestie Anna decided we were gonna do all the stuff I'd missed out on. She was totally the opposite of me, a total party girl who loved breaking the rules. So I figured she was the right person for the job. After she got off work, we took the subway into the city and she took me to my very first scary movie. I was literally shaking the whole time, even before we saw the movie, because Anna told me she had beer hidden in her purse. I had no idea how she'd managed to keep her cool the whole time. To be honest, it was so fun, but not in the way I imagined. The fun part was the fear, being scared of something jumping out at me on the screen and the idea of getting caught with our drinks. Like, I knew what we were doing wasn't good, but it was one of the most exciting things I'd ever done. After the movie, Anna wanted to get me a cigarette. And that's where I drew the line. My grandpa smoked my whole life. He coughed all the time and sounded like an old truck when he spoke. Luckily, she understood and didn't try any of that peer pressure my mom always warned me about, but she did make a compromise. As an extra birthday gift, she was gonna buy me a Juul. I figured, what, right? I was down to try it, and if it was gross, I just wouldn't use it again. I started walking to a bodega, our arms linked and making sure to stay under the street lamps as it began to get dark. I'd never been to the city at night before, and I think that night would be my last. We took a shortcut through the park, which, looking back on it now, was a really dumb idea. From there, things just got worse and worse until I really thought I was gonna die that night. I don't know what happened exactly, I just remember Anna tripped and there was a snap in her ankle. She was in so much pain that she basically collapsed on me, and when I realized she wasn't going to be able to walk, I helped her to a bench and we sat as I called my roommate to come get us. The phone was ringing when the bag was put over my head. I started screaming as loud as I could, and a second later I heard Anna's muffled shouts too. My instinct was to start running. I managed to get to my feet before a pair of strong hands grabbed my arms and started dragging me away. The person put their hand over my mouth to silence me further, but I kept shrieking until my throat was raw in the hopes that anyone would hear me. I heard someone pop the trunk of the car and I struggled harder. I'd been to enough women's safety seminars to know that our chances of survival would drop by 50% if they got us to another location. But neither of us was strong enough. They put Anna in the car first, then someone picked me up and literally threw me in next to her. We were pretty much crushed together. There was so little space I didn't know how we would breathe if they closed the trunk. They did, and it felt like being shut in a tomb. I ripped the hood off of my head and started banging on the door, but when the car roared to life, it became obvious the old engine would be able to make way more noise than Anna and I combined. As we started driving away, I began to lose hope. Anna, who was never emotional, was crying next to me and saying over and over how sorry she was for getting us into this mess. I knew it wasn't her fault, and I hope she knows that now. And yes, that does mean we did survive, spoiler alert. It turns out movies may be more useful than you think. In the movie we just saw, a girl was also put in the trunk of a car and managed to get help by kicking out the taillight. I had no idea if it would work, but if it did, it could save us. If it didn't, we were likely dead anyways. So I started kicking the corner of the trunk as hard as I could, until suddenly I felt a rush of cool air against my ankle. Anna's head was facing the broken taillight, and I told her to put her arm through the newly formed gap and start waving. At our captors to stay in the car while they opened the trunk, and we were free. It took a long time to get back to our old selves, but things got better once our kidnappers were put behind bars. It's scary to think what could have happened that night if we hadn't seen that movie. Hopefully, we won't have to use that knowledge again. I did a lot of partying a couple of years back when I had no business doing stuff like that. I was barely in high school, and I mean that in every sense. My parents just couldn't control me. I'd be out all night and either sleep through my classes or cut school totally to go hang out with my friends. Me and my parents fought a lot back then. I always came home smelling of something illegal, my attitude stank, and I'd even got a stick and poke tattoo of a goat on my arm. Yeah. It was a pretty bad time, but I thought I was living my best life. All that changed the night of the rave. I'd kind of planned to be at another party, but a guy I was talking to, Matt, convinced me to go. It was my first time going out to a place like this, and it was probably my last too. I told my parents I was going to a friend's house for a sleepover, but really we were putting glow-in-the-dark paint on each other's faces and taking selfies in our outfits. We looked like a couple of mannequins from Party City. Even though I'd always been part of a big group of friends, Lizzie was definitely my bestie. You could say we were a bad influence on each other, but we were just trying to have fun. She stole a bottle of vodka from her parents' liquor cabinet, and we headed down the street where Matt came to pick us up. You could hear his beat-up truck from a mile away, and when he pulled up next to the curb, Lizzie gave me a look. He was a little older than us, but that wasn't something I thought too much about at the time. We sped out of the suburbs and into the surrounding countryside, leaving behind the quiet houses and streetlights as we veered off onto dirt roads surrounded by untamed shrubs and trees. We passed the vodka around as we drove and blasted music from the CD player. Felt like it was going to be an awesome night. Little did I know. The rave was in an abandoned mill all the way out past the farms and lodges near the woods. Half the roof had caved in decades ago, and there were rumors that it was haunted. But there was more than enough space for a decent party. Purple and green lights were glowing inside as we parked on the side of the road. And when we got out, the music was so loud you could feel the bass in the ground. Matt said he'd catch up with us later and head over to a group of guys he knew. Lizzie and I rushed inside out of the cold, and the place was totally packed. Everyone dressed to impress and was covered in neon paint. We danced and drank and mingled with random groups of people, having just as good a time as we were. It must have been around midnight when Matt came and grabbed me. He asked me if I had my Juul, and I told him yes. He told me there was a guy that had pods with THC in them, aka the stuff in dope that gets you high. He said the best part about them was that there was no way my parents would smell it on me when I got home, so we should go get some. We followed Matt to the back of the building where things were a little quieter. It was freezing cold, and I hugged my arms around myself, hoping this wouldn't take too long. Well, I was totally wrong. We walked for a while, following a path that led us through the woods until we were suddenly at the main road, and there was a van. The engine was running and the side door was open. A bunch of people were standing around in black clothes, masks covering their faces. I knew this was bad. Lizzie and I both stopped, paused to assess the situation, and then bolted back into the woods. We screamed for help as we tripped on fallen branches and slipped on dead leaves, running blindly through the trees and praying we didn't run into any of them. It wasn't long before I realized we'd gotten ourselves totally lost. Our only options were to try and get back to the party where someone might help us, or let these weird people catch us and do whatever they intended on doing. In the end, it turns out we didn't really have a choice. We could hear footsteps behind us and see flashlights getting closer and closer. We kicked off our heels and kept sprinting, trying to ignore each sharp rock and splinter stabbing our feet. I could see the light from the mill again, and we made a beeline to the edge of the trees. We were going to make it! And then I realized something terrible. There was a fence. A 7-foot chain link surrounded the part of the woods we ran into, and we couldn't see where it started or ended. Our only option was to climb. I tried to give Lizzie a boost up, but we were so tired from running, and the rain from that afternoon made the fence impossible to grip. They grabbed me first, then Lizzie, and dragged us both kicking and screaming back to the van. They tied us up, put masks over our eyes, and sat in silence as they drove us to God knows where. I honestly thought I was going to die that night. After like an hour, we came to a stop, and our kidnappers started moving around, mumbling to each other. I heard the van door open, and then the mask was ripped off my head. It was my parents! They were standing on the sidewalk next to Lizzie's, and I was so shocked and confused I couldn't find the words to say anything. It was an intervention. Matt had been helping our parents spy on us this whole time, helping them figure out just how much we were ruining our lives. Taking us to the rave, luring us outside, pretty much kidnapping us, was all part of a scared straight plan they'd made up. I still don't agree with their methods, but looking back on it, they did the right thing by interfering. We were ruining our lives. After that, we were taken to separate facilities and put into rehab programs. I was so surprised when I came out months later and realized how much better I felt. So much more awake. It hasn't been an easy road. Lizzie couldn't stick with the program, and I haven't seen her for years now, but I hope she's doing okay. Whenever I feel like giving up, I think about that night and how my parents would definitely pull that stunt again if it meant keeping me safe. When I was in college, my best friend Allie was attending a university that was about 2 hours away from mine. In high school, we had been inseparable and spent nearly every day together. Even though we talked on the phone every single day, it was hard not seeing each other every single day once we went off to college. At one point, I had a 3-day weekend and wanted to visit her. Neither of us had a car at the time since we were freshmen and walked everywhere anyway. I also didn't know anyone on my campus who had a car and would be willing to drive me such a long distance. I did some research online and saw that there was a public bus system that had a bus stop within walking distance from my university. I could buy a ticket that would take me all the way to Allie's campus. I was a little nervous since I had never been such a long distance on a public bus before, much less alone, but I decided to purchase a ticket there anyway. Allie said that her older brother would be able to give me a trip back to my campus after the weekend was over. In the days leading up to the trip, Allie and I talked excitedly on the phone every night about all the fun things we were going to do while I was visiting. She was going to give me a tour of her campus and show me all of her favorite restaurants and coffee shops. On the day of the trip, I woke up early and packed a bag for myself. I then walked to the bus stop, my ticket in hand. When the bus pulled up, I passed the ticket to the driver and then walked down the aisle to find a seat. I instantly realized I may have made a mistake. While I'm not one to judge, the majority of the people on the bus appeared to be a little sketchy. Several men started staring at me fiercely, looking at my body up and down. There was a woman who was talking to herself, and another guy who was rocking back and forth and appeared to be on drugs. I was by far the youngest person on the bus. I found myself an empty seat towards the back of the bus, ignoring one man whistling at me as I walked past. I just sat down and put my AirPods in. I was just going to listen to music and mind my own business the rest of the trip. About an hour passed by and I was excited to be getting closer to my destination. I texted Allie and gave her an update on my location, and suddenly I heard a weird screeching sound and the bus lurched forward. I didn't pay much attention until we pulled up to a bus station a little while later. We weren't at our destination yet, and I knew this was an unplanned stop. The bus driver got out and began checking something under the hood of the vehicle. After about 15 minutes, he got back in the bus and told everyone there was an engine problem and we wouldn't be able to go any further. We would have to wait at the bus stop and see if we could catch another route to our destination. I groaned and gathered up my things as we all got off the bus, and I walked into the station and checked the incoming routes. There wasn't a bus that would be going to Allie's campus for another 3 hours. I was still an hour away from campus, and there was no way I could afford an Uber ride that far. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when all of a sudden the man who had whistled at me on the bus approached me, a sly grin on his face. He told me how pretty I was and asked if I would like to get a hotel room with him. As he got closer to me, I realized that he reeked of alcohol. I told him I didn't want to go anywhere with him and that a friend was expecting me. He grew angry and grabbed my arm harshly. My heart began pounding in my chest and I was preparing to scream for help. And suddenly I heard a young woman yelling, "Miss, do you need some help?" I looked over and there was a woman standing next to her husband while holding a baby in her arms. I nodded my head hard. The husband approached me and stared down the drunk man until he released me. "We can give you a ride," the husband said. Because it was a family with a baby, I felt I could trust them. I told them where I was going, and they said they were actually heading to the campus too in order to visit with the woman's sister. They said that they would be happy to take me along. I thanked them, feeling a surge of relief. The husband opened up the car door for me while the mother and her baby went around to the other side. I climbed in and the man began driving. I fastened my seatbelt and looked around. Much to my confusion, I didn't see a baby seat. Was the woman holding the baby in the passenger seat? I craned my neck over to see, but the woman's arms were empty. Had there ever been a baby, or was the woman holding a doll or something to trick me into feeling safe enough to get in the car? Something wasn't right. My gut was telling me that. "Hey, where did your baby go?" I asked. There was no answer. I asked them again, thinking they hadn't heard me, but there was still no answer. "You know what? You can just drop me off here. I'll catch a ride with a friend," I told them, desperate to get out of the car. There was still no response. I started to think about how odd it was that they just so happened to be heading to the exact same place I was. I was so desperate to get away from the drunk guy that I wasn't thinking rationally. "Can you please let me out?" I asked, panic rising even higher. "You're staying right here," the man told me gruffly. I knew without a doubt that I was being kidnapped. Trying to be as subtle as possible, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly texted Allie. "Been kidnapped, in the car, heading north. I will call 911. Tell them to track my phone." I hit send, and then with my phone muted, dialed 911. I could see that I had connected with the dispatcher, even though I wasn't able to speak with them. Good, they could ping my phone now. "Can you tell me where you're taking me?" I asked the couple. No response. "Are you going to hurt me?" I asked. Only if you don't shut up, the woman said loudly, and then flashed a pistol at me briefly before putting it back in her lap. My heart was pounding, but I was glad to know that the police would be aware of the fact that they had a weapon and that I was in danger. I remained silent, my palms shaking, my eyes glued to the window, desperate to see any sign of an officer. We pulled onto the highway and the man was driving fast, too fast. We were well over the speed limit. Suddenly, I saw one of the most welcome signs I could imagine. Red and blue flashing lights directly behind us. They had found me. The man cursed under his breath while the woman urged him to drive faster. I was shocked. They weren't going to pull over? The man began flying through the traffic, winding into different lanes, barely missing vehicles. There were more police cars and they were all around us now, their lights and sirens on. I looked ahead and saw a semi. It was changing lanes. The man didn't see it in time and drove right into it. I braced myself for the impact. We were in the air and the car flipped several times. There was the awful sound of crunching and glass breaking before, finally, silence. I opened my eyes and saw that the car was upside down. I was suspended in the air by my seatbelt, but I didn't feel any pain. I looked to the front of the car and both the man and the woman were slumped over. I could hear the sounds of the police and paramedics outside of the car discussing the best way to get us out. "I'm right here," I began calling. Suddenly I saw a paramedic through the window and he reached through the broken window and unlocked the door. He swung it open and began undoing my seatbelt while asking me questions about where I thought I was injured. I told him I felt okay. He helped me out of the vehicle and I was able to stand. Remarkably, I didn't see any markings on my body. Due to the protocol, I was taken to the hospital to be examined but was later released. The doctors called it a miracle. They told me I was lucky to be alive. As for the couple who kidnapped me, they were both killed upon impact. Police told me they were linked to a human trafficking ring and that I was likely going to be their next victim. Sleep tight.